on sequestration. It may not be your field, but I've been struggling for a while. In the Isle of Man, we have a very productive crop of bracken on the mountain land. It's very dense. It's a massive tonnage per annum. Who can tell us whether that sequesters more carbon than trees?
Well, that sounds very interesting. It's not something I know about, but absolutely. I mean, there's lots of potential for carbon sequestration on land, and you know, it may well. I mean, and as I say, my agenda here is not to sort of encourage one land management system over another. It's just to get the numbers right, so that in making these decisions, we're informed by their impact on global temperature.
Please, can you give us any name of the expert on sequestration? I've not been able to find one.
Oh, so, I mean, yes, I can, I mean, but I probably need to know a bit more about the crop you're referring to in particular. There's many people who work on soil carbon sequestration. My suspicion is there's somebody out there researching it. There generally is, but if you drop me an email, I'm very happy to connect you up.
Okay, Darren.
Just to follow on from that, crops that absorb a lot of carbon, like hemp, you know, because it's all about it's either trees or farming. And it was just like kind of rotating crops that can work within farming. So you're still using the fields for farming rather than turning into tree crops. And hemp's far superior as a carbon sequestration of a long period, because you grow it every year, rather than a 20-year crop for trees. It's far superior. So why wouldn't governments absorb that rather than using the narrative that animal farming is bad and veganism is a lot better for the environment? Is that not wrong? No?
Okay. Yes, I mean, a short answer is, well, no. So my answer is to why I think so. But let's be clear. Agriculture has global industrial agriculture has degraded our biosphere substantially over the past 100 years or so. We have through agricultural practices released a lot of carbon into the atmosphere and increased methane concentrations in the atmosphere, both of which have caused substantial global warming. So let's not beat around the bush on this. I mean, globally, agriculture has been a big part of the problem. And in some parts of the world, it still is a big part of the problem. We're still seeing deforestation, and substantial release of carbon to the atmosphere through overuse, over tillage and so on, releasing soil carbon and so on. So that's, those problems continue, but that doesn't mean that we cannot manage agriculture in a way that doesn't cause any further global warming, and indeed, in fact, partly compensates for warming caused by other sectors. And I think that's important to recognize. I think there's, as you say, there's sort of the arguments around veganism, for example, tend to be based on the assumption that the only way to stop livestock causing global warming is to eliminate the herd entirely. Well, as I've tried to explain, that's not true. If you want to stop a livestock herd from causing global warming, you absolutely can't allow it to increase. By the way, it is increasing globally. Herd numbers may be coming down in the Isle of Man, but if you look at the global dairy herd in particular, it's still going up and going up fast, and that's causing a lot of global warming. But so you can't afford for your herd numbers to rise forever, but at the same time, you don't need to eliminate the herd entirely. Provided you get get emissions going down by around 10% over 30 years, for example, that's enough that the herd no longer, the herd's methane emissions specifically no longer causes any further global warming. So I think that's a much more positive message for agriculture, that it's, we need to get agriculture's contribution under control, but we don't actually need to eliminate any particular type of agriculture in order to stabilize the impact of agriculture on global temperature. In contrast, for example, the practice of burning fossil fuels and dumping carbon into the atmosphere has to stop. As long as we're still doing that, we will be continuing to drive up global temperatures. If you want, to fly planes and burn kerosene in the planes, your only option is to capture the carbon dioxide they generate back out of the atmosphere and stick it back underground. So that, that's hard. It's possible to do, but that's the only way to stop aviation from causing further global warming. Whereas in contrast, agriculture is, it's perfectly possible to envisage all kinds of different agricultural systems that no longer cause any further global warming.
Thank you. I'm aware the clock is ticking, and you've got further lecture to do this afternoon. We'll take maybe one more question. Come on.
We've mentioned a few times about aligning incentives so that they help with climate change mitigation. Can you explain what you mean about that?
Did you get that one?
I didn't, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Have another go. Go on.
So how would you align incentives so that they align to climate change action?
So how would you align it?
I mean, that's exactly what this is all about. I believe that people should be, if we're focused on a long-term temperature goal, which we are, we want to stop global warming as soon as possible, limit it to well below 2 degrees, and if possible, close to 1.5 degrees, then we should design our incentive systems to reward actions that reduce global temperatures, penalize actions that increase global temperatures, and if somebody's not either increasing or reducing global temperatures, leave them alone. That would be the way I would do it. And what that would mean would be, for livestock farmers in particular, it would mean that if a livestock farmer managed to reduce their herd, then in the year that they reduced their herd, they'd be rewarded for doing so, provided, of course, the reduction was permanent. Or if they managed to reduce their methane emissions by introducing a food additive or vaccine or something, then they could be rewarded for the positive outcome on global temperatures. I mean, the fact that they'd drawn global temperatures down. And that's not the way our incentives are designed at the moment. At the moment, our incentives would simply say the livestock farmers still generating methane emissions. They might be generating a bit less methane emissions than they were last year, but they're still causing, they're still contributing to the overall carbon footprint, and so would be penalized accordingly. And so I think we'd have a much more, in fact, I think agricultural climate policy would be much more effective if it were aligned with temperature outcomes than if it were based on the outdated carbon footprint that we use at the moment. So, but it would be, but reducing methane emissions would be seen as a positive thing to do, in the way that planting trees is seen as a positive thing to do, rather than for positive from the global carbon perspective. Of course, there are other things which have to be taken into account as well, rather than just sort of less negative, which is the way it's perceived at the moment. And in particular, livestock farmers would be reassured that they don't need to change out of the business entirely as a result of climate policy, because it's perfectly possible to have a sustainable herd which isn't causing global warming.
Thank you. Okay, we'll draw close to the questions and just ask Ian to close our meeting first, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Professor Allen. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that was a really inciting and very interesting talk that we had there. I think here in the Isle of Man, we've got a unique opportunity, and what really stands out to me from your talk is that we need to know the data. Without the data, we can't make informed decisions, and policy going forward. So I think, you know, that's one thing I think we really need to stress, that we need to know the data and know the whole data, not just cherry-picked items of data. As an industry in the Isle of Man, the agricultural industry, I feel we are in a fairly good place, but we have great potential going forward to be in an even better place. One thing that does strike me from the conversations, we also need to remember that as a population, we need to eat. And generally, we can't eat trees. So if we can benefit environmental outcomes while still producing food and feeding people, I think that's a very important message to take from today, along with recording accurate data. I'd like you all to join with me in giving Professor Allen a big round of applause and thank him very much for his time today.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, thank you for letting me join you in this way as well.